Okay. Okay, let's start because today we have quite some ground to cover. And Tara, could I just ask you for a favor to close the door, but keep it ajar because otherwise it gets locked. So first, I just want to do some quick logistical announcements, and then we'll go into what is ICT4D. So first and foremost, sorry for those of you who missed class last week. I messed up on the video, so there's no sound. But essentially for the project itself, so Ashita was basically leading the class, and for the project itself, we will be spending some time this Wednesday to talk about it. And then I think project proposals, which is a brief one-pager of sorts, would be due sometime next week or the week after. I don't remember what's the deadline. Look at that on the deadline itself. And then on the blog posts, right, the blog posts are starting this week. So Christina, being brave, ICT champion, and the only one that signed up for this week, has posted the blog, and she sent it to me. So I wanted to get a sense of, I haven't posted it out yet because I wanted to discuss really very quickly about the platform that we're posting it onto. So here's my suggestion. If you have a platform, for example, if you already have a blog, or if you have a network that you would like to post on their platform, feel free to do that, and then as you market your posts and get our classmates to comment on them, don't just give them that URL. Right? If you don't have a platform and you don't care, then basically what I'm using right now is a blog platform with the URL barefootlawyers.org, which is sort of a social enterprise that I have and am establishing. But what I'm hoping to do is that it's sort of a defunct blog anyway, you know. But the thing is that what I'm hoping to do is that if we ever get the ICT Center website up, that then I could actually migrate the better blog posts together with the comments all over. But like I said, you're more than welcome to post it anywhere else. Okay, so on the blog post, one thing I do want to remind everyone is that please comment, right? So Christina, once I give you the URL, you can market it to the classmates and anywhere else. But please comment because that will be a part of your grade for the class participation part. Okay, so that's blog post. Next would be on the project. So again, I have, under the assignments, I have put down bullet points about what the projects are, and we will talk a lot more about it on Wednesday. Okay? Okay, so with that, let's talk about ICT4D. So the agenda, and once again, you remember this framework. We're done with what is development right now, and for this session, hopefully we'll get more or less everything done. We'll be talking about what is ICT4D. Last week we had Ashita come in, and you get a sense of the types of discussions that go on during our typical graduate seminar, and then maybe you can compare it to sort of the more broad practitioners discussion that we will be doing today. And we will be talking specifically about ICT4D development theories. We'll talk about the origins, the history and the future, the Hicks article. Hopefully you read that. And then we'll talk a little bit about does ICT work in real life. So with that, let's talk about the theories of ICTD. Some distinctions first, right? Even before we talk about technology for ICTD, in industry, there's a distinction between development and humanitarian work. Does somebody tell me what the difference is? Development. So there's, what we call international development, right? And then what we call humanitarian or emergency work. Someone tell me what's the difference. Tim?
It's just the urgency. The humanitarian is more urgent, solving an immediate problem, whereas international development is more of a long-term approach to solving a problem.
Okay, good. Anybody else? What are some examples of a humanitarian project versus a development project?
Relief work should be humanitarian work.
Sorry? Relief, yes, yeah, humanitarian relief emergency. Yeah, so this is like the, Haiti disaster, earthquake, things like that, right? So the ICT stuff that goes on under here is sort of, it's mashed, but most of the time you see that it's a different set of literature. Those are the things that talk about, how do you kind of do a needs assessment within 72 hours so that, people don't die? How do you, use, say, a web platform to match refugees that are separated from their families and use face tracking software, for example. So these are some like projects that are there. But just know that for whatever reasons, this is sort of a separate notion in international development. You could have, for example, CARE that does both, but then this is usually a separate department. So within international development, right, let's talk about, like, what's the difference between ICT and technology? When we talk about the ICT for D type literature. It's alluded to it.
And what's the difference between ICT and technology?
Yeah. What is, sorry, were you asking?
Yeah, were you asking what the difference
Yes.
between technology and ICT?
Yeah. What is the difference between technology for development and ICT for development? And what is the branch that we're talking about, which is ICT for development? So I just want to make a distinction. I mean, it's the IC, right? Mm-hmm. Right? So when you talk about technology, right, there's technology, and then at some point, Heaps was saying, in the old days, technology was just heat into the cooking stoves, alternative fuel, anything that has to do with science and technology, but not necessarily, but that could also include, information and communications. But the ICT field that we're talking about, is very specific to, things like the internet, et cetera, et cetera. Make sense? So this is where the group of literature actually falls under. The type of theories of ICT for D that we're talking about. Is it Monday morning and it's too early? Right? Just make a distinction with regards to this. Any questions on that?
Yeah, so that overlap is pretty small. Is that meant to be that way? Or?
Well, you could. Some people say, it's sort of like this, and then some people say, no, it's kind of like this. Right, and you will see that this is actually the backdrop against that we're talking about when we're talking about the theories, because it's all meshed. But typically the ICTD type literature, because there's a lot of literature about technology for development. The cooking stoves, they come from like civil engineering, not computer science, but that kind of background, right? And the information and communications technology comes interdisciplinary from multiple sources.
So can you think it's like maybe the tech includes engineering and that huge branch of machinery, as opposed to ICT, which is maybe more
computers, mobile phones,
sharing information,
right? Anything that has to do with information and communications, right? So that's the part right now that we're talking about as a first distinction. So let's go into the good old development studies, right? And let's do this really quick. What is, you read Tim Unwin's article, right? Give me some feedback about that article. I find it very theoretical, but it makes some sense to me. What is some feedback before we go into his development theories for ICTD? What did you think of that article? Any kind of feedback? Chen Which is a great feedback, yes. I know, I read that. Tim is actually a good friend of mine. He teaches at the London University right now. He's actually he's made himself into the chair of the, Commonwealth Telecoms, CTO, Commonwealth Telecoms Organization, which is based in London, and he's having a hard time. He's like, I should be back in teaching. But he's one of the pioneers. And so, my sense, and where I'm coming from is to basically say, it feels messy to me. It feels like, he's trying to make sense of what's happening with the ICTD field, right? And so if we look at development theory, right, tell me a little bit what he's saying about, what are some of his theories, or at least he's reviewing the theories. What is he saying are some of the prevalent theories of ICTD? Right, and remember he started with the development studies? Hello? Wait, did you read the article? be honest. Don't worry if you didn't. But how many of you did read the article?
Which Tim one is the first one, the big one.
Tim Unwin, yeah, the one that I say it's a long page.
I skipped it.
Yeah, I did a year ago.
You did a year ago. Okay, good. Right. So did you get a chance to read or no? Just browse through it. Okay. So basically, what he's saying is, okay, he says he came up with this, like, okay, I don't know how really to make sense about ICTD. The literature came from a lot of different places, but most obviously it comes from development theory, right? And so he went through all this stuff that we did before: modernization, right? Liberalization, the dependency theory. At least for those of us that remember this, right? Okay. So anyway, he talked about development theory he first went through all this development theory, and then he plonked it, and he says, okay, well, from this kind of backdrop, right, you have the same old thing, governance, right, rights-based approach, all the things we studied about. He went through the whole gamut of it, and then he says, okay, so for the people that come from these groups, this is what they're saying is ICT for D, right?
So everything except for dependency? So everything except for
He actually talked about dependency. He went through even way more. He talked about the Marxism, and a whole bunch more. So basically, it's a long, like I said, it's a long theoretical review about what's happened. So I'll leave it to you to read, okay? But so basically, what my takeaway is just this. It's not that different from what we discussed about. Remember that exercise that we did, where we said, how would you apply development theory if you're from these different groups, right? Remember this simple framework that we came about? And then you came up with, okay, this is how we would spend this $10 million if we were the World Bank solving this problem. So in the same way, these ICT folks are saying exactly the same thing. The modernization folks are saying, well, technology equals modernization. You need technology as a prerequisite before something can be modernized, right? Because this is sort of the old liberalism view. And then I think one of the founders of modernization, who is Rostrow, remember Rostrow and his 5 stages of growth? That's the guy who proposed that development is this template, right, of 5 stages. And one of the stages, which is the take-off stage, that is where technology comes in. So I'll leave it to you to read, right? But the takeaway I want you to take from it is that's the hodgepodge again of where ICT has come in. Got it? Okay, so that's the big picture. The other thing he said was also this. He said, okay, and then I actually don't know if he's saying this is part of the new development. This is coming out from development theory, or these are separate theories. But he did talk about globalization and knowledge societies as 2 other sort of branches of theories. Anybody wants to tell me about what is the gist of globalization and how IT fits in, or ICTD?
Well, I feel like it relates to the modernization aspect of it, so people feel like there's this inertia towards what a developed society is, and they share this information access and knowledge aspect to it, and so that should be the goal for these countries who are still in development. And I think that ties in with the whole leapfrogging theory and stuff. And I'm interested to see if the new development is, like you just said, you don't know if he's talking about the agenda of people who are writing about it now, but how much that's still prevailing.
Right, you mean what, globalization or?
Yeah, feeding into this, access and information that you can write aspect.
Right.
And whether that should be driving our agenda.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. I mean, that, globalization was a set of literature that, if I'm not mistaken, probably came from different disciplines. Econ, political science, maybe different forms of social science that talks about the phenomena of globalization, right? And so I even under development theory, globalization is sort of a theory. So what he's saying about globalization, which is what you were rightly pointing out, is that, okay, well, the world is now being connected, right? So the theory of ICTD is then what, right? So within this, you have your sets of debates, right? Some people say, well, the role of ICTD here is ICTD equals globalization, right? So it runs the whole gamut again. You see this debates being, okay, technology is, God, or technology is it, right? That it is globalization, because without the internet, we won't have the phenomenon we have today. Then the debates flow into, well, technology, is evil, right? Because it creates the digital divide, with globalization, the rich becomes richer, the poor becomes poorer. So this is very similar to the types of debates that have been going on that level, but just applied to the globalization side of things. So if you read his article, you will see that he runs through, some of the literature, who says what, and where is the gamut, and then he's basically saying, once again, these folks are so extreme, the truth is probably somewhere in between, right? So similar. What about knowledge societies, which is the other thing that he was talking about? So in his paper, he's basically saying, okay, ICTD theory, well, there's no real ICTD theories, right? But I can see that there are ICT theories that have come out from these various branches. One is under the development theories branch, all these stuff, right? 2 is under globalization, and 3 is under the knowledge societies theory. So someone tell me, what is he referring to? Take a stab.
So I did not read this, right?
That's
but,
the theory person didn't read it.
I know, it's very blind. I just know from the perspective of Manuel Castells, who writes about media theory, that he calls it the network society, though. But basically, it's anyone who is part of you might want to call it globalized ICT society, so anyone who can plug into this more global society is part of a knowledge and network theory. Right,
yeah, very, very similar. And again, within knowledge society, within the whole knowledge society's literature, there's a whole bunch of theories upon theories, right? On the one hand, someone is saying, okay, you know what, knowledge, we've moved from agriculture to industry, and right now we're in the knowledge era, right? So knowledge is the way to go. So to promote it, basically knowledge is it, right? So that there's a proponent that, so everybody should be given knowledge. So if you're doing development projects, just give knowledge. Don't give necessarily, anything else, because this is where we are. And then there's a whole gamut to people who say, you don't have to give knowledge. Knowledge should be part of the market, right? Okay, maybe in the way that we have done our framework, right? Knowledge should be part of the market, i.e. it should just be a commodity that can be sold and be promoted as part of the market. And then there is the other part that says, okay, knowledge is it. Okay, get it? So if we look back, once again, within the Tim Unwin article, he's basically saying, okay, there's a lot of buzz out there, but I'm trying to make sense of things. Things seem to come out from development theories. Here's what I think they are. These are the debates that come out of globalization. This is what I think they are, and this is what I've come out of the theories that have come out of the knowledge societies, and this is what I think they are. Get it? So if you ever be so inclined, you can read it for fun. Okay, so let's move on, right? I want to get a sense, like, what is the state of the ICT4D theories. Did you get a chance to read the Hicks article? I mean, I actually like the Hicks article, the one that is in the readings for today. No? What happened? The rain is supposed to be conducive to like reading and prep work. Well, that's the interesting part about Hicks, because he put a lot of things together. He's sort of trying to be the pioneer. Do you remember that supplementary reading that I listed that is called The Lost Sheep of ICT4D literature? Okay, nobody should have read that, right? If you didn't read the two main articles, nobody should have read that. It is fairly interesting. I mean, it's someone from the communications department at Anaheim, which is the Anaheim, from the communications department at UCLA. And it's interesting because what he's also saying, oh my gosh, I'm trying to make sense of all these theories, and I can't. Okay, so what is his sense about the state? Okay, so I'm taking it nobody read the articles. If no one read the articles, then I'm just going to breeze through. We're not going to have a discussion. Okay, so basically, if you look at the state, right, this is a very telling article. Can you see it? A telling diagram. Slideshow. Okay, so this is from the Hicks diagram. He's saying, you know, okay, at the center of this is ICTD, right? I think he's trying to be the shepherd that Rialto, the author for the supplementary article, is saying. So basically, what this guy from the communications department is saying is, oh my gosh, you know, all this literature is all over the place. It's like, you know, a mess. And they come from all different kinds of discipline. There's nothing inherent as a theme. Everything is really messy. So what he's saying is, well, somebody needs to be, you know, the sheep herder and basically try to make sense of all these theories and to actually come up with some really coherent theories about ICTD. So what Hicks, I think maybe Hicks is trying to do that, because if you look at who Hicks is, he's kind of an interesting guy. He runs, I think, the first Masters of Science program in ICT4D at the University of Manchester. And so he's sort of seen as a leader in ICTD in some ways. So what he's saying is that, well, you know, I don't even want to call this ICT4D anymore, right? I mean, this is very academic. So he's an academic. He's like, ICTD is not even the right term. And if you read the articles, I would have said, why did he say that? But since you did it, he proposed that, okay, right now I'm going to call it development informatics. So he's introducing yet another terminology. But what he's saying is that it's sort of what we've talked about. All these theories come from different fields. Economics, governance, and development studies, out of which governance is one of them. If we were to plug in another figure, I would also plug in, you know, globalization. I would plug in, you know, knowledge societies could come up from development studies and information systems, for example. Are you getting the gist of this diagram? Right? Basically, the takeaway is it's a messy field out there. If development studies by itself, right, can have a diagram that looks like this, then ICTD theories out of which development studies come from is even more messy. And then so you can go into each of these disciplines and you could read about what it is. So if I were to plug in, right, right here. So I would say, okay, so this is Hicks' proposal. Tim is basically saying, well, it came from development studies. He read through this gamut. And then he went through, as I mentioned, knowledge. He went through globalization, which could be under development studies. It could be under economics. And then he talked about knowledge societies that could be under here, under there, whatever. So the point being, what's this? I mean, what's the state? And tell me, you know, not being a theory person, how does this compare to the theories from your individual fields? Is it more scattered?
I think in general, academia is becoming more interdisciplinary. So I think this is the future. And I'm coming from city planning. City planning is the same, probably even messier.
Right.
And I think, even if you look at more traditional fields like medicine or law, or, they also become looking at different sciences now, disciplines.
Right, absolutely. That's sort of the trend, right? And in some ways, you can blame it on globalization. I mean, it's sort of weird because if you think about it, barely 100 years ago, 200 years ago, this was the way that people kind of studied. Everything was liberal arts, everything was interdisciplinary. You studied, fine arts all the way to, hard sciences, right? And then so you have all these great philosophers. And then at some point, somebody came in and said, oh yeah, because of specialization, academics should be specialized as well. And therefore we have all these disciplines, right? And then globalization, or whatever you want to call it, knowledge society came in and started to sort of disrupt the model. I mean, there's a lot of this kind of debates too within higher education. And so right now it's again this interdisciplinary thing. It depends. Okay, so any other comments on this before? Yep, Eric?
I just wonder how much this feeds into the, giving technology agency as like the change bringer. And so earlier we talked about how institutionally they had ICTD focused grants and development agendas, right? And then they said, okay, this isn't really working. We understand it's part of some greater development context that is just going to serve as a tool, right? And so that seems to clash with this kind of this effort to say, okay, let's bring all of this together to look at ICT as this one aspect for development. And so I guess I'm struggling with how to extract that out in a way that doesn't lead people to this optimistic view of just, okay, we just need to use this hammer and...
Right. Well, this is the ICTD guru who says, well, we shouldn't call it ICTD and we should have our own, and that's what his master's is called. It used to be called ICTD. I think they're changing the name. Christina, you have a comment? Any comments about that? What do you think? Are we boxing this in, or
I think what's important is to actually acknowledge some of the sources that, ICTD as if it were information from development informatics is drawn from. I think that's maybe more, I'm not sure, but I'm thinking maybe that's more an argument, rather than actually hammering out in that field to say, okay, this is a field that we actually draw from.
Yeah, I agree. I just learned the consequence of that. And I'm sure there are basic rules of thumb that we abstracted out that need to be aggregated. I'm just thinking of the consequences for people approaching the literature. So.
Right. Well, it's really confusing. I mean, when we try to figure out, what exactly is ICTD, I mean, it's such a new field. And so I guess in some ways, maybe that's how disruption of, academic disciplines happen, right? I mean, things happen in the world and then somehow this new branch is being created and then you borrow everything from everyone. And then as you get old enough, you get stuck in those ideas. It's like, okay, this is it, right? In a lot of ways, that's like life. When we get to our 40s, we're like, no, that's the way I have my breakfast. Do not, adulterate it. And then maybe there's some kind of life cycle. I don't know. I mean, you ask the philosophers, they would say, yeah, sure, this is sort of like the world, and then you have more and more arrows, and then at some point it will point you to God, it will point you to the theory of life, and that is the one encompassing side of things. But yeah, you're right. It's confusing, and interestingly, on the European side of things, they seem to be a little bit ahead in terms of the ICTD field. We're slowly catching up, so they have more of the leadership on the literature. Okay, any other questions on this? I guess the question would be, the takeaway, like I said, is, plug in. Don't even take this as I don't necessarily like this diagram. I don't necessarily agree with it, but that's his way. He's talking about how things are connecting, and then you plug in the Tim Irwin, and then you look at the Wikipedia article. I don't know did you read the Wikipedia introduction to ICTD, right? I don't know if you get a sense of when they had that title that says Theories of ICTD, where did those theories come from, you think? They had a few smattering of, okay, you know, I think that this is where it comes from. Any ideas, or just take a guess?
Well, there's one called modernization theory, which alludes to what we were talking about before.
Awesome. Yep. So, you know, from development studies, and out of development studies, you can draw a dot to modernization, and, you know, even neoliberal. Right? And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, they also allude to a little bit of like communication studies or something like that, where that might have come from. Yeah, so all this just to say, okay, so at the end of the day, how is this relevant, right? So if we plug in all these, if we draw out the lines, like, okay, Wikipedia, you know, and da-da-da, Irwin, and then Kentaro probably comes from, I don't know where he comes from, but maybe he might belong to the ICT folks because he's writing directly about ICTD. What is the relevance to us? You know, I mean, how does this apply in practice? Why is it even important for us to know this? Challenge.
No, just try. I think like from what the other guy was talking about, from ICT 0 to 1 to 2, I think most of the ICT 0 and 1 were primarily concerned with technology and getting technology on the ground. But then we're not trying to move to 2, which is a more holistic approach. We need to involve the people and like really look into sustainability and like the governance of the technology that we'll be implementing. And also, I think one of the points I was talking about was like because of globalization, we need to have like all parts of the world becoming developed so that they don't like, so we were talking about them moving away from where they are, moving to the places which are currently rich and developed. So we need to sort of develop the whole holistically without just looking at specific tech issues that we can give.
Right. Yeah. That's one of it. It's like, oh yeah, we have this integrated, holistic approach, so that then we can try to make more difference on the ground, rather than a single dimensional view, right? You know, I think at the end of the day, you know, knowing this in just a broad stroke is helpful, and then that helps you kind of keep with the trends of where, I mean, at least I'm talking from a practitioner's point of view, right? If you're an academic studying one of these theories, you'll be like researching it and coming up with your own sort of alternate theories or comments on that. But from a practitioner's point of view, what is helpful to me is basically just to follow these trends. And then it comes back to the Zen development, right? When you go, oh my gosh, you know, everybody will be arguing about whatever works there, and at some point, you know, I come to a point where I go, well, there's probably not a perfect solution, but on a pragmatic level, just know enough so that when you talk to donors or when you are trying to raise funds or trying to design a program, that you kind of get the gist of how things fit in. You know, and that ends up making you, you know, a pretty good program manager if you kind of can pull the big picture and put them into sort of a framework.
I have a question. Like, it's good to kind of draw from cross-domain frameworks or cross-disciplinary areas, but is there are there any toolkits out there which can be used like right away, and which kind of draws from these different domains? Is there anything of that sort right now?
A good question. Tell us what you mean by a toolkit.
Like IDEO has one, but it's very broad, as in you can apply it to anything, and I mean, there's no...
You mean the ICTD toolkit?
Yeah, but I haven't seen many other toolkits apart from that.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what you mean by toolkits. You know, I think in the industry, right, toolkits are sort of very simplistic ways of saying, okay, here's a box of things that you can use for this sector. You know, whether it's ICTD would probably be too general for one toolkit, right? I could see a toolkit that says, okay, how do you conduct an infrastructure project in a rural village in country X? And toolkits are usually very practical. They are very practitioner oriented. That's why most of the times it's by the organizations that services practitioners. So I don't know. I don't think so. I think that if you think of the field as a field in itself, it's barely 10 years old. So, it's at the point where it's like, oh my gosh, we don't really know what's happening. People are putting some toolkits together. I think World Bank has one, and, there's probably Oxfam. I don't know if they did an ICTD. They are still a smattering, and this is just to show you how new the field is.
I'm sorry, how did you define what a toolkit was?
Google it. They probably have a better definition. But
is it what we think it is? Is it just a set of tools like technologies that can be applied towards?
It's overused. It's overused in practice. So anything can be a toolkit. But usually it is a simple way of saying, okay, here are 5 things that I think you should know and you can use if you're doing project X. Right?
It could be a framework. It could be like just a knowledge framework.
It could be a knowledge framework. Most of the time, there are a lot of management tools. Like, okay, how do you conduct a focus group, in a village? Okay, and then there's a toolkit on the 10 steps, right? And then there are these illustrations you can use. Yeah. Any other questions on that, Rachita? I hope I answered you. Basically, i.e., this is a new field. Good to go into.
Because we went. Some of us went to this lecture series on Wednesday where they're discussing the ODK, the Open Data Kit. I think that's what it's called. And it's pretty much like the people who, when Android was first started, they had a group in Google that used it to create a really, really flexible, open survey system. So they could easily, if you brought an Android device in some village somewhere in the world, and just you gave one to the village, they'd have a really easy to use.
Okay, got it. So you're coming from, again, it's interesting, right? Because your use of the word toolkit comes from the computer science side of things. Yeah, so yes, a computer science toolkit is sort of like a framework, right? Like a Ruby on Rails framework or anything that would allow you to use it to deploy applications really quickly, right? But and I'm guessing, Ruchita, what you're asking is...
That was my basic assumption when I started looking for it, but I think...
From a computer science angle, whether there's a toolkit? It's hard to find a toolkit for ICTD, because really, what is ICTD? It's technology of all gamuts. It's like launching an Android app all the way to, having a blogging website, to putting up an e-governance website with a huge, maybe an e-governance back-end database, right? So the toolkits for each of those things, they are being done. You can see, right? So, okay, if we take the toolkits from you guys, the definition, it comes from computer science. Where's computer science? Oh, this is amazing. Where's computer science? I guess science, technology, computer science is in India. I guess it's information science, right? Or information systems, and then computer science might be kind of
is that
connected.
Technology sciences?
I don't know. Science technology feels to me more like sociology. I have no idea. So, but if you think about that, then what you would see is probably a lot more folks that are like, okay, I'm a website expert, right? Or I'm a Ruby expert. And hey, you know what? I took this class at ICTD, and you know what? Maybe I can develop a module, right, for deployment in rural areas, whether it's on dust or whatever. So then a module might come from here. So that's how interdisciplinary the field is. So Rachita, no, but maybe that's one thing that is a good business idea. An entire website where you can find your ODKs or your frameworks for things that are relevant. Yeah. Okay, shall we go on? So I want to go on to the history and future of ICTD, but this is the Hicks article, right? So even before what he's called ICTD 0.0, where's the argument of the origins of ICTD? What do you think? Or, even if you hadn't read the debates, did it start with the internet? Did it start before? Did it start way, way, way before? What is your take?
They maybe start with the introduction of mobile phones.
Okay, so if you let's look at it, right? There's the origins, right? And then what Hicks calls version 0.00. Do you know what software versioning is? Yeah. Okay, what is software versioning? Explain it do you know what software versioning is? Okay, explain it to your classmates who might not know what is software versioning. Somebody.
Whenever you release some software product, you start with a version of the product, and every update gets a subsequent increase in that numeric representation.
Right, so it's just a simple way of, it sounds way more software versioning, right? But seriously, it's just a way of keeping track of your projects. So you could have, in fact, these days when I do my slides for the class and when I do a paper, I version it, to call it like version 0.0. And when you jump, right, sometimes you get 1.6, 1.7, and then all of a sudden you might jump onto 2.0. What causes that big jump?
I feel like the development phase. So like when you're just making gradual increases, like tweaks or fixing bugs or stuff like that, you stay in the decimal part. Then we want to unleash like a feature, a version that makes more a well-established new feature. Mm-hmm. You can bump up the number.
Right. Yeah. And typically it's an organizational kind of. Okay, I think it's good enough so that if we jump up one version, it's justifiable. So this is what Hicks. He's trying to use software versioning to explain the sort of growth or the history of ICTD. He's saying that we're at 2.0 now. But let's talk a little bit about the origins. So Tim, you're saying it started with mobile phones, right? What about before that? What about mainframes? That wouldn't be ICTD? This is not in the reading, so don't.
TV.
Okay, TV.
They're
Awesome.
going to be able to learn in their home and
Right.
education.
Okay. SMS?
No.
This is a mess? It is.
I was just talking about TVs and like radios.
Okay, go back. What about, TV was invented, 1940s, 20s? I don't know, something like that. And what about before that? Radios, okay, and then maybe even before that? Telegram, Morse code, right? That's kind of a form of ICT. So how far back can we go to talk about like ICTs for development?
Maybe when we started keeping track of individual development projects.
Keeping track of televisions?
No.
Sorry.
Individual development maybe major development projects.
Okay, so if development projects, development as a field started in 1950, so you're saying, origins maybe it might start in 1950s, right? But let's go back, right? Because there are a lot of people that say that, right, in the literature, but a lot of people also say, nah.
Speech and language?
Speech and language, yeah. There is a big proponent that says ICT for D is not a new thing. Today we're saying this is a new thing because it's internet and whatever. But seriously, ICTD has been with us since the beginning of time. The invention of writing, even the, what are those things called when you carve messages on a stone, right? Or language. Those things are ways that promote development. It promotes communications and development. So these folks say it goes way back to part of being humankind. Because technology, right, if you don't think, technology is something that it's a social construct, right? Because when we talk about technology today, there's certain things we think about. But at that point in time, right, you're talking about invention of writing, speech, language, homogeneous language. And so the printing press. So, I think that there's actually a good class in the iSchool, I think it's called History of Information or something, that takes you through these. So within this part, there's a whole lot of debates about and these are the people that says, these folks are we're just living one part of what we've already done. And that these folks are making such a big deal out of this ICTD. Just know that there is this debates that exist. I think Tim Irwin or Tim Irwin might have alluded to it a little bit. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about, what is generally seen as ICTD 0.0, 1.0, and 2.0. You know, this is from the Higgs article. Where is the 0.0? From what year to what year? And what happened?
1950s to 1990s.
Okay, 1950s to 1990s. So what? And then version 1 is to 2000s, okay? 2000s, maybe early 2000s. Okay, this is late 2000s. And this is where is it late 2000s, right? Yeah. And that is where we are right now. So what is it? What happened during phase 1? And think about this, right? This coincides again with the development movement, i.e., you know, our development theories and what happened in the developing world. So if you think about it, as we discuss this, tie this in with, you know, what was happening then. It was modernization theories, you know, a lot of top-down. What were some of the ICT things that he said happened?
Focus on governments.
Focus on governments, awesome. To tell us a little bit more about it.
With administrative efficiency, so if they could just run more efficiently, people will benefit.
Right, and this is a very kind of modernization kind of thing, right? Computerization, IT, internal efficiencies. Okay, and this is again, you know, you think about it, the World Bank is lending all this massive amount of money, so they'll be like, oh yeah, you know, you've got to run this better, we will fund you to do an accounting program. What else did he say happened? He said there were like two major phenomena, and then, you know, governments gave rise. Okay, so basically what he's saying is, well, there was a focus on government, and then at some point it became, you know, IT industry as market, right? So he's saying that, well, you know, governments were being funded, and then at some point, you know, there was a lot of focus on the IT industry within that country. Why? Because you can see that this then ties in with the predominant development theory at that point in time, which was very top-down, growth-oriented, etc. Then let's move on. What happened in the 1990s? And this is where he said some things had a baby, and the baby is ICTD. Who? No, he did say that.
I think in the 90s the internet came around, and he also says there was the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs.
Right. He says it's a love fest between who? Internet and?
MDG.
And the MDG. Tell me a little bit say a little bit more about that.
So he says that with the internet, there was a new interest about applying ICTs in the developing countries because they were easier to reach and stuff like that. And with MDGs, everyone had a goal in mind that they had to achieve within the next 15 years.
Right.
So all of that kind of like ushered in the new development.
Yeah, get it? And remember when we were talking about MDGs being sort of the best thing that we might have, right? Being something that we can all do together. And then there's this, so at this point in time, there was the promise, right? These two young people, they were in love, you know, the internet was all brand new. We thought that there was so much hype about, you know, leveling markets, opening up the world, leapfrogging. Have you read like Thomas Friedman books? You know, The World is Flat. So that's the kind of thinking, right? Like, wow, the internet has so much promise, and now developing countries can leapfrog. And then the MDGs, because the MDGs was like the one thing, right? When we talked about all those development indicators, everybody was talking different indicators, different indexes. The MDG is like, for the first time, governments are actually talking about this being a goal. So what happened was that, oh wow, that is a promise to bring about the MDG. Then what happened? What types of projects were there, and what happened to lead it to 2.0?
Lots of telecentres.
Lots of telecentres. Why if you came from this philosophy, why do you think so?
It's the access to internet access that is a problem, so as long as we provide access, the MDGs equals movement.
Right. Yeah, cool. It's a very simplistic type of thinking, right? That probably came from the world that we live in, i.e., give someone a computer. And then they say like the hole in a wall computer project. You remember that? That was always cited as like, give them a computer and good things will happen. The hole in the wall? Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Wasn't it like they would install a computer just like in a wall and people they were not given any training and they were just supposed to go and explore it by themselves?
Yep.
And so that's what I heard about it.
Right.
It was people were just like they were taken aback. They were kind of like intimidated by it. Sort of, and then
Right. So there's a lot of hype about like, okay, give people, and this was done, I think, in India. It was an experiment, somebody's pilot, right, where they cut a hole in a brick wall and basically just plunk in a computer with a mouse. And so they're like, okay, let's just, there's no webcam, I don't think at that point in time, but let's just observe and see what happens. And then they found out that all these kids, wow, knows how to use the operating system. That's really cool. That means equals give them access, and then they will, have, leapfrog and become citizens of the world. But then what happened? What about these telecenter movements? What happened in the 1.0 phase that Hicks was saying?
He was saying that there were a lot of scalability issues in telecenters.
Yep, tell us a little bit about it.
So many of these telecenter type projects which were aimed to giving more access to information and the internet, they had a scalability issue where they couldn't scale, and even when they did a pilot and it worked, and when they scaled, it didn't work. So that kind of like scalability got on the agenda of all the people who were thinking about this.
Right.
So that has been like one big lesson learned for everyone.
Good. Yeah. Good. So basically, telecenter projects, they plunked in a lot of money. In fact, the Canadian government has a telecenter program. That was what it was called. And, it was telecenter after telecenter that was being built. At the end of the day, when they actually did studies on it, they're like, well, but what are we actually doing when it comes to access for information? What are we measuring? What is important to us? Is it the number of people that is touching a mouse? Is it, the number of people that's getting access to anything that's on the internet? Is it the number of people that are getting access to things that we consider are important for them in the internet? So there's a lot of these kinds of philosophical questions as well, in addition to the implementation issue of like, wait a minute, these telecenters don't seem to be working. We give them free access and nobody seems to be coming, or they seem to be coming, but they only want, they want Office application training. So there was a lot of questions. Anything else to add about 1.0 before we actually go into where we are right now, which is 2.0? Yep. So 1.0 was also fuel. If you think about what happened in the Bay Area, and this was the world that I came into when I joined the Asia Foundation in the early 2000s. You see that there was then a lot of hype in Silicon Valley too because of the internet startups. And so there was a lot of hype about, wow, these internet startups, there's the love fest, right? Internet is going to change the world. And so there was actually quite a lot of funding, even from Silicon Valley, that says, okay, Asia Foundation, how do you actually merge these two? So that was kind of the world that I came into, and I came into the end of the telecenter domain, where after 3 years of doing telecenter projects, the donors were saying, well, what's your impact? Did you do any measurements? And if you did, what is success? And how do we measure success? And all these questions are not answered even today. So let's move on to 2.0. Tell me a little bit about where he says we are right now. And these are some of the things he talked about. What are some of our priorities that should be different? What are some of the models of innovation that should be different? How about implementation and the theories that we should be thinking about? What is he saying is the world that we live in right now? And what is he recommending that we all do when we go into practice?
Well, it looks like he's saying that the current context of how people in other countries use technology can have a much higher impact than trying to bring in some new innovation, because obviously the infrastructure is there, they're already familiar with it, they're literate about it, and so we should focus on using those tools that they're familiar with and improving applications for those tools.
Right, so applications was one thing he talked about, and applications that was, for the poor people, right? Do you remember what he talked about innovation models? And I would say this ties in with practice today. Remember, I always say, donors used to fund telecenters. And then right now, it's all about innovation, apps, appropriate technology, even the DIL grant that we went to, right? That comes from this kind of philosophy that, telecenters wasn't working. USAID funded a lot of telecenters. So yeah, he's talking a lot about, let's move up this. So this is a diagram that is, in his article. So he's basically saying, for a long time we've been focusing on all these things, right? Hardware, wiring people up, the last mile. Have you heard of, what is the last mile? Last mile, have you heard of that?
I think I started I think it was something like you should empower people at the last mile of the development, so let them have all the entrepreneurship ideas and whatever they are doing. Basically, guys, what Kentaro was saying is that you just amplify the last mile of just empowering them with technology, but leave the existing structures as they are and just amplify them.
Right. Yeah, that's a very similar concept. I'll tell you, the last mile was an infrastructure type of thinking, and USAID actually had the last mile initiative where they actually funded a lot of money to actually wire up that last mile that is from your rural village to the mile that is to the closest tower or center, and that's it's about rural infrastructure. And so what he's saying is we spend so much time on all these things in the first part, right? Because telecenters are really about hardware infrastructure, maybe some software, right? But we should probably go up on the innovation ranks to look at applications that make sense, use these things called user processes and things like that. Yeah, so good point. Anything else? What else is he saying that we need? And he said a lot of things. So this is actually a pretty cool article to read because it's a very quick snapshot of, here's where it is right now. What else is happening right now? What about innovation in terms of priorities, right? I'll cut it short. Priorities, he's basically saying, should we still focus on innovation on infrastructure or not, right? And he's saying, yes, I think we should, but not to the extent that we should be focusing on promoting innovation. And he also talks about applications, which is what Eric had pointed out, being a priority, because applications is the actual platform where things that can promote change. If we so then he went on and he says, so if we say innovation is that important, and that's one of the two priorities that I'm advocating, what are some of the models that we have done, and what should it be? And if you had read the article, he came up with 3 models. Somebody tell me? It's actually fancy words for things that are very simple.
The laboratory.
Which is called a ProPOR, right?
ProPOR. PowerPOR.
What is that? The second one is what?
Collaborative.
Para, okay. And then the last one is?
Grassroots.
Yeah, grassroots, but what's so fancy? POR, right? P-O-R? P-E-R. POR, okay. So he's saying these are the models that we have been using in terms of innovation, right? And this is interesting because then you would see why the DIL grants are dispersed as the DIL grants the way they are right now. So tell me, what's the difference? POPOR, PARAPOR, and PERPOR. Fancy words for basically saying, this is for the poor, right? Okay, this is with the poor. And PERPOR is like by the poor. So he's basically saying, a lot of these things that were done in version 1.0 are very PERPOR, i.e., people like us or some technologists coming in and saying, we really should be doing this kind of infrastructure and this kind of apps. And then he's saying, that didn't really work, it's top down, it goes into the fundamental development literature. And then parapoor is like with the poor. Let's facilitate them. Let's do a focus group. Let's do interviews and see what they need, and blah blah blah. Right. So that's another type of model, which is very Chambers as well. You know, Robert Chambers, that is also very predominantly about facilitation and getting feedback from the poor. So this is your capacity building, doing focus groups. Per poor basically is like by the poor. So a lot you see that this is incredibly different in terms of practice, because what happened was that in the early 2000s, you see that this trend is moving down, and as he's predicting. The pro-poor is us coming up with, say an app, right? And or the one laptop per child. Are you familiar with the one laptop per child issue? And there's a lot of debates out there because, this is usually seen as a pro-poor project. There's somebody from MIT thinking that, oh yeah, I think that a lot of the world's problem will be solved if each child has a laptop. So let me design this and then let me give it to them. So lots of debates about, this is too, top down, you're from MIT, what do you know about Africa, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's the para-poor, which is that, okay, you go down and you actually work with the people, maybe a little bit like what you guys are doing. What model are you using with your app?
So if you consult the poor, is that already para-poor?
Say that again?
If you consult the poor together.
Yeah, that's what they're saying, with the poor, right? So together you're consulting them, you're trying to get feedback, you're trying to do a needs assessment, et cetera, et cetera.
But I think I guess already having a generic platform kind of feeds the opportunity for the poor aspect. So kind of like how M-Pesa originated from this new behavior of mobile phones that the poor had basically co-opted to use as monetary exchange.
Right.
So then they recognize that, and so
that's pretty cool, because to design your platform per se, you're doing this kind of para-poor, right? I mean, you've gone down. What about some of the the needs assessment, right? But you're designing just a platform for that. Am I correct? If I'm
right.
honest.
I mean, it's in between para and per, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right, and it's subsequently, at some point, what you're saying is that, the poor will actually be using the platform to create, to produce, to do services. So yeah, your platform development is para-poor. Your your eventual platform will be used in a per